Let's find out.
Excellent. So first of all, I just want to thank everyone for attending today. We're always thrilled to be able to give these in-depth workshops to be able to show people a little bit more about what our software can do. And today, this is easily one of the biggest subjects. It's absolutely our most popular feature. It's one of the most powerful tools. It's workflow. It's moving documents from one place to the other. It's routing them. But let's just start off with the question: what is workflow? And in a nutshell, linear document review and approval. And you can see an example process there. What I'm going to be doing today is I'm going to be taking you through this process. We're going to build a very simple workflow. In our next session that we're going to be doing in a couple of weeks, I'm going to take a much deeper dive into workflow and get into some of the minutiae of it. But before we do that, I just want to kind of set the table for us. Now, that's not the only thing the workflow is for. It can also be used as a document-centric process. So when we're routing them through, so we're not talking about an abstract here. We're usually talking everything within FileHold as a document management software. It's a document-centric process for routing them through. Our workflow is adaptable to match each organization's needs. So nothing that we're going to be doing today is going to be fixed in stone. It's very flexible. We're going to be able to adapt this into the future and make it work for whatever processes you need to carry forward. It's tailored to be as automated as you need, or it can be very manually triggered. So again, it's an adaptable solution, and the tasks are both, can be either tightly controlled or can be very loosely structured. So we get some of those elements into it as well. Now, where we can use workflow, it's really anytime documents need to be looked at by somebody else and the process should be logged, or even one of those things. You want someone to look at it, but you don't care about the log, or what's more important is the logging of that process. In accounting, we often see this with invoices or AR documents. In sales, with purchase orders, sales orders, shipping manifests, with agreements, with contracts or orders, human resources, manuals, any kind of official documentation that's passing through, employee forms for leave requests, expense reports, or for processes such as work orders, standard operating procedures, any of those kind of elements. And also an important element could be a change order, such as engineering or manufacturing. These are all completely viable use cases for when we might want to deploy workflow as a solution to help with getting those documents looked at by another user as a review or approval process. Now, why use a workflow? Well, first of all, it keeps your documents digital. It takes us away from paper, and it means you don't have to print something off just that someone else can look at it and review it. It eliminates a lot of those steps. We can do an e-signature for approvals. One of the aspects that we'll do, and you'll see this later on today, is we're going to be able to use our password as an e-signature for this. So we're actually able to get an official legal sign-off on these documents as an e-signature kept within FileHold. It allows for granular management of a process. You can see where things are slowing down, where there's breakdowns of those things. You're not just sort of sending a document off into the wild and then waiting for it to come back. You could look at each of those steps as they come through. And that's because there's audit records for each document. So not only can you observe the process as the document is moving through workflow, you could also come back to it later on and see what happened in those steps as part of the uneditable audit log that's being generated by FileHold. There's trackable action within the system. You know what each task is, and you can see what the status is of that. You can make choices on that as you build your workflow to match what you need to track. It meets regulatory obligations for reviews. So if you're required to run documents through a review process, this is an official review process that you can cycle your documents through. It's very easy to set up and employ. And in fact, I'm going to show you a simple one. And I'm going to, when we say it's simple to set up, we're not kidding about that. It's actually a very simple process. And remember too, you can make your workflows generic or specific. And we'll be talking about that as we go through today as well. And finally, it's flexible. It'll match what you guys need to do. Now, before I go into what workflow can be, let's consider a workflow that you might do with paper. And I'm going to use accounts payable. I'm going to use invoices. That's mainly going to be talking about today. Please don't worry that that's a limitation. We're really going to be talking about these invoices as just any document that's moving through a routing process. But first of all, let's consider it with paper. So an invoice arrives into the organization, and then it goes to the front desk. They receive it, they process it with whatever means they do, and then they put it into an envelope and they send it over to accounting for review. Accounting confirms it's a valid invoice, and then they send it over to the department for review. So again, we're going back into an envelope and off it goes. Maybe one of those big inter-office ones with the red circles and the string that ties between them. It then goes over to the department. They confirm the expense, they assign a proper purchase order number to it, and they return it back to accounting. Accounting then will take that invoice, they'll enter it into their accounting software, and they'll assign a GL code to it. Then the invoice is likely to be sent over to the CFO for approval, and then finally, we have an approved invoice in the system. Now, that's a great example of what a paper-based process should be, but we also understand that there can be issues with that. What happens if that envelope goes missing? Well, if we're missing the invoice, there's no other steps in the process that can happen, and we're sort of back to square one. We have to recover the invoice and find something else. Maybe instead of that, maybe it's just when it goes over to the department, the person in the department forgets to actually do that work. And because they've forgotten about it, we can't pay that invoice. Now we're in arrears with the company through sort of, an accident that's happened within the system. Or we've got a very common thing too, the CFO is out of the office. They're on vacation right now, no final approval, and they're insisting on that final approval before that document can go out. So again, important details about your process. Now, FileHold lets you replace some of these steps, but we understand that a paper-based process is usually going to be an inefficient process because you're having to move paper around and wait for that paper to be found, recognized, opened, accessed, viewed, acted on, and then put back into an envelope and sent to the next step. There's no tracking in this. Once the paper goes out, the amount of effort you have to exert in order to find that document can often be greater than the actual value of that document's processing in the first place. There's no backups to this. Once that piece of paper leaves that person's hand, it's gone forever. There's all manual processing. Nothing happens unless somebody moves that piece of paper from one person to another. There's multiple points of failure. There's various points where this can break down within the system, which then have to be forensically discovered in order to figure out why failure occurred. And ultimately, it's vulnerable to human error. And let's be clear, we're not going to be able to introduce a system that can eliminate human error, but we want something that's going to reduce the human error potential. And so let's consider now a FileHold Workflow AP process instead of this paper-based process. So when the invoice arrives, instead of it just being sent directly over to accounting, the front desk can add the invoice to FileHold through something like SmartSoft Capture or adding it in manually. The workflow can then automatically start. So there's no initiation on there. And just by adding it into FileHold, the workflow begins. So now it's gone off to accounting. So accounting gets an email letting them know that the invoice has arrived. They confirm it's valid, complete their task, and it moves over to the department to confirm. The department confirms the expense. They enter any metadata they might need in the document, such as the PO number, nothing to scribble on it now. We've got it data entered, so it's now a searchable value within the system. They complete their task. The document now goes back over to accounting, where they assign a GL code. They then complete their task, route it over to the CFO. CFO approves it, and the approved invoice is now in the system. It's completely searchable. The review is searchable. The approval is searchable. The metadata can be exported to the accounting software if we want, and accounting can be informed automatically that the document has completed its life cycle. So we've now seen that document arrive, gone through a review process, and nothing is going to get missed in this. So clearly we're talking about a much more efficient process. It's fully tracked and auditable at each step of the activity. We can't lose the document. Once it's in the software, we're only dealing with copies of it. We're maintaining that original. All these steps are automated. Nobody has to manually do something to get it to move to the next step once they're complete. No filing envelopes back and forth. We're minimizing our failure points to reduce our human error. So again, we're getting those advantages into the system. Now, it's quite fair to ask into this, but what if my process isn't this simple as what we've outlined here? And we see that all the time too. We've heard of people who say, oh, sometimes we don't know when things are going to be starting into the documents. They're not just going to start as soon as it arrives into the office, or it needs to go to different people every single time. I don't know who it needs to go to, so I need a system that's going to be more flexible for me. Or I might need other opinions onto this. Maybe I don't want to give just this one person a review. I might need somebody else to jump in on that. I have a reasonable deadline, so I don't want a computer system to tell me when things are going to have to be due. And I've got multiple documents. How do I get those through into this workflow? Aren't I dealing with a single document here? Maybe I need something else to be done with this. I have to move my tasks around or rearrange them based on your use case. And these are all really valid concerns that people bring to us. And it's what we've considered. So instead of having a random start, we can have a manual initiation for the document. So now we can choose when the document's going to go off into workflow. You have multiple documents, no problem. We can have one workflow with many documents attached to it. If you have other opinions that are needed, we can do some ad hoc reviews by postponing it to send it over for review. When that's done, we can bring the document back. If your deadlines aren't working for you, you can make each task have its own due dates that are flexible for you, so you can change them as you go. If you need other people, you can assign tasks to them. So instead of having it locked down to the same people each time, you can choose where it's going to go to. And most importantly, if your tasks are different, we have an agile process where we can move things around. We have both very fixed, very rigid workflows and very flexible, very plastic workflows that you can choose from. So with all that in mind, let's now take a look at constructing a very basic workflow. So I'm going to take us over into my FileHold environment. You'll see over here I've got my desktop application signed in. And you'll see up here I'm logged in as my own name, so I'm the user in this case. And in our scenario, I've added an invoice into the system. So now I need to route this for reviews or approvals. Now I'm just going to point out, if I right-click onto this, I'm going to see a whole bunch of different processes that I've already built into this here, and that's just from other demonstrations that I've done. So initially, right away, we can see that we can have different processes put onto the documents if we want them to have different processes. So we allow for more than one solution here. So what we're going to need to do is we need to build ourselves a workflow. Now, if you've used FileHold before, you're probably used to the idea of a template within FileHold. We've seen templates for metadata. You build a template, then you apply it to a schema. You build a group, and then you apply that group to a schema in order to figure out who's going to have access to it. We're going to do the same thing with workflows. So the first thing we need to do is build a template, which I come up here to administration, workflow management, workflow templates. This is a list of my available templates that I have that are open for me to use. And I'm just going to build a new one rather than look at any of these ones. But again, I want you to get a sense that I've got lots of different workflows, lots of different processes, lots of different templates. So again, we're not fixed onto only one or two things here, lots of tools depending on what you need to do. So we're going to start off by clicking Add Workflow Template, and then we've got our list over here. Now this top box over here, and I'm only going to touch on a couple of these only very briefly because a lot of this is more in the advanced settings, and I want to show this to you. We're going to be looking at this in a couple of weeks because this is a deeper dive into it. We're going to start up here with the workflow name, and so we're going to call this Invoice Review, just so I have a name for it. So we've got a name on our process, and I'm also going to give this a custom naming function. Now, I'm using a custom name because I want there to be more information than just invoice review. So if I open this up, it's going to allow me to assign an automatic name to the workflow as soon as I add it in. So I'm going to ask it to automatically rename, and I'm going to use the workflow name, so invoice review. Somebody knows immediately what it is. Then I'm going to come into here and I'm going to do something a little silly. I'm just going to scroll down to my departments because I've got a list of departments that's available. It's a metadata field that I've built. And you can see there that I had a lot of different metadata fields. This is the one I want here. What that's going to do is it's going to put the department name that the invoice is for right into the name of the workflow. I'm going to make it very easy to identify that workflow for somebody. Again, for our last field onto this, I'm going to take the document name. So now I've got a name of a document. So I've got an invoice review for whichever department and a name of the document that's built into it. So again, very simple convention, very easy for people to see and know what's going on with it. Now, as I say, I'm going to skip most of this here, but you'll see this section here used in schemas isn't editable. So I can't add anything into this right now because I'm building the template. We don't apply the template to the schema. We go into the schema and then we apply the template to the schema there. We don't do it at the creation stage. So that's sufficient now for this first big box up here. Again, we'll go through the rest of this later on. Now I'm going to add a task. Workflow is a series of tasks. You can have up to 20 linear tasks of activity built into the workflow template. So when I click this, it's going to open up a new bubble for me down here. So we can see we've got our original bubble up here, and then down below, I've got my new one. Now, our tasks are going to be in one of two varieties. It's either going to be an approved task or a review task. So if it's a review task, it's going to be in that purple. If it's an approved task, it's going to be in the yellow. Now, in this case, we need to think about what the nature of what we're asking someone to do is. The only difference between a review task and an approved task is what you define. Now, by default, FileHold does not require a password when you complete a review task, but it does require a password if you do an approval task. And for the purposes of our demo today, that's the exact definition I'm going to use. A review is asking someone to look at something. An approval is asking for someone to sign off on it. And so because of that sign off, I want to make sure I'm using approvals where approval is most required. So our first step over this was to send this over to accounting. So our frontline person is going to receive this document. The next place it has to go to is accounting. So we're going to ask to say this is going to check if invoice is valid. Simple task and simple title up here, and then task instructions down below. Please check the invoice. And I'm a terrible typist, so I have to apologize to everyone as I force you to watch me hunt and peck my way through this. So please check the invoices and make sure they are valid. Perfect. So we've got some simple task instructions onto this. Now let's go through the rest of these areas over here. The description is optional. You can put that into here. You've probably seen this before in FileHold. Optional descriptions, powerful tool, but if you don't want to use it, you don't have to. Now I have to have a reviewer for this. I will not be able to save this until I have a reviewer. Now I could, if I wanted to, allow the person who's initiating this workflow to allow them to be able to define who it's going to be. So I don't know who it's going to be, but I'm assuming the person who launches this does. We're going to look at this much more fully in our next session because this is more to do with the advanced session for getting someone else to assign it. But for this purpose, what I want to do is I want to assign this to a particular user or a group. So we're going to route this over to the accounting team so that they can take a look at it. And then maybe instead of this being Chris is going to be involved, it's only ever going to be Bob. So I'm going to select Bob and add Bob as the recipient. So now Bob's always going to be receiving these tasks coming through. So very simple to put into this. Notice I could also include the document version owner. So if this was my document, I could actually be the one sending the review. That's sort of like last quality check or the workflow initiator, because I may not own the document, but I'm the one starting it off in the process. And so I want to include that in the steps. Now we also have some other options down here. One of X, this is really useful if I'm sending it to multiple people. So right now this is going to Bob. If I'd selected the group for accounting, it'd go to both Bob and Chris. But in that case, it means that both Bob and Chris have to complete the task before we're going to move to the next task. And that could be a barrier. We never want that. So if that's part of the task definition, then that's fine. But if I only need one of them to complete it, I could make it a one of X task. And now I have a choice as to who's actually going to complete the task. I can ask them to force reservation. This is typically done when we're dealing with a one of X task, because if I'm sending this to 10 different people, I only need one of them to do the sign off. I might want that first person to reserve the document so that everyone else knows, oh, it's being worked on, I don't need to worry about it. Because I only have a single recipient here, I'm going to turn off one of X, and that grays out the forced reservation. Require password is also grayed out because it's a review task. I'm not actually requiring them to put their password in because it's review. If I wanted the password, I would use then I would use an approval task. We've also got allow checkout. This is if I want the person who's doing this task to be able to check the document out to make a change. And we're not going to be doing that in this case because our goal is not actually to modify the document, it's just to check to see if it's valid. It's a yes/no kind of task that I'm asking them to do. So we can put some automation to this if we wanted to. So at some point we can pass this document off to another user using an export script. This is a brand new function of FileHold 16.3. If you've never seen this before, that's because it's part of 16.3, and so we encourage you to consider getting an upgrade of that if you're interested. The export script is currently a professional service, so we can build the script to pass this the metadata for the document to another software in the format that you'd like it to be. So that's what the script can execute. So you can choose to run that script at any point. There may be a logical point where you say, okay, now at this point, I want to run the export script. And we'll see that later on. And then finally, we've got our due date. So when is this task going to be done? I'm just asking them to check if the invoice is valid. So I think a day is perfectly fine for an amount of time. That's great. We've built our first task, nothing further to do here. I'm just going to scroll down to the bottom, and then we're going to go ahead and now choose our second task. Now, in this case, this was a task we're running it now to our departments and asking them to approve it. Is this, we know this is a valid invoice. Is this a legitimate invoice? Is this something that we're actually going to be paying on? So we're now going to come up here and we're going to say, for our title here, department approval. So very simple for that, just department approval. And we've got an approved task for our approvers. We're now going to go in and we're going to choose a group. So in this case, I want this to go to my department head group. So I'm going to add them in, and then we're going to say, okay, so I've now added in all of my department heads for this task, but I don't need all of them to do the sign off. I only need the person who's in charge of that department. So I'm going to make it a 1 of X task, because I only need one person to do that. Now you see I've got a new option down here for allow approval postponement. We're going to hold off on that until our next session, because it's worth talking about in a bit more detail. So that's allow approval postponed. I forgot to mention this up here. At any point, I can convert the main document to a PDF. We can have two kinds of documents. We could have main documents and supporting documents. I can convert main documents to a PDF as they run through. So if you want to preserve the document, we can do that. And we can also at the same time turn that into a sign-off sheet. And we'll be dealing with that in full detail in our 4th session. We want to be covering it next time because there's a lot of detail to it and it's worth taking the time on it. So we'll be looking at converting to PDF and dealing with a sign-off sheet in our 4th workflow session. So that'll be, I think, in a month and a half. So again, we can run automation. We can put a due date onto this. In this case, we can say that the department head this is a high priority for them, so we're going to give them 4 hours before the task is overdue. And again, we can put a description down here. Please review the attached invoice. Let's try spelling that. Invoice and approve if valid. Please add PO number to document metadata. Okay, perfect. So we've got some instructions into there, and we're going to say okay to that. So now we've got our second task built in. We're going to go down, we're going to hit our 3rd bubble, because after it's done with that, the initial plan was to route this back over to accounting so that they can attach the GL code to it if it's valid. So we'll just do this very quickly. We've now seen these steps before. So we're going to send this document as a review task. We're going to say assign GL code, and then we're going to go to our reviewers, and this one's going to go over to Bob. So we're going to add Bob onto this because that's the only accounting person who's going to be dealing with this. If I had a group, I could send this to a group, but in this case, I'm just going to send it to Bob. I'm not going to worry about any of these other functions. We're going to do a day, and then we're going to say assign GL code to document. So we've now got that attached there, so we understand what our instructions are. And the final thing that we wanted to do was we wanted one last approval, which was CFO sign off. So we got a simple process onto that. And this time we're going to route this over to somebody who's got signing approval on it, which is going to be myself. So we're going to send this back to me as the user for that. So we're going to add myself as a user and say okay. And again, I'm going to leave the rest of these settings all into here because that's fine. And please approve valid invoice. Perfect. So now we've got our total task done, and we're going to say okay. So we've now built ourselves our invoice review, and we can see it right here with a timestamp as to when it came into the system. Now, building the template's the first part. The second part of this now is I need to associate this template with the document. So we're going to go into our document schemas. So administration, library configuration, document schemas, and we're going to go into our invoices document type. And we're going to go over to our workflow. And remember I had all those different workflow templates? We're going to add another one to this. So we're going to choose our invoice review and say add. And you'll see it's right up here at the top of the list. Now, I can choose how this document's going to initialize a workflow as soon as a document comes in. So by default, the usual setting is do not start any workflow automatically. So do nothing until somebody manually triggers a workflow. Or I could ask it to automatically start on the following workflow and adding a new document of this type. So for instance, I could use invoice review, and that's going to trigger as soon as I add a new invoice into the system. Now, this is also really useful if you're dealing with any sort of sensitive documents that must go through a review process. This is a great tool for that. This is also interesting. Automatically start the following workflow when adding or checking in a document of this type. So now we're adding another functionality to this, which is, in addition to just a new document, also a new version of a document. So think about a standard operating procedure, any of those kind of documents. We can route those for approval as well to make sure that they're going through. So when someone updates an SOP, it has to go through that review process automatically. But in this case, we're just going to do a manual starting for the workflow. The last option down here that I want to point out was hide versions of this document in the schema until the document is approved. So this means that if the document hasn't been approved, it's hidden from other users. they can't see it because the document's not available to them. So with these settings, I'm going to say OK. And then before I do anything else, because I've changed some of my settings in the background here, I need to do a quick refresh. So I'm just going to come up to here and refresh all. And now we're going to refresh. So it's going to refresh my screen. I just want to show you what that hide until approved really means. Let me just do a refresh here within the web client. There we go. And I'm going to step over and take a look at this folder here from this user. So here you can see I'm logged in as Andy. Andy is not the owner of this document. So because that document is hidden until approved, it's actually hidden from this section. Andy is the person that this document is going to be routed to. So I know Andy should be able to see this document, but here it's been hidden from them because it's been hidden until approval. And if those of you have eagle eyes, you might see the little tiny H that's on there. That H is the indicator that this is a hidden document. So this is hidden for now, and nobody else can see this except for the document owner or a system administrator. So we've hidden the document from people. Now, just to show you another thing here before I start the workflow on this, I'm just going to show you the metadata for it. So we've got all of our completed fields. Now, in this case, I already put a PO number into this from before. So let's just pretend for fun that this didn't have a PO number. So let's clear that out. And then our departmental list would be defined by the frontline user when it comes in. So they see the invoice and they go, oh, this is for operations. So we're going to define the department to whom this document should be sent to. So good. So we've got our metadata for the document. We've updated that. We're now ready to put this document into workflow. All right. So all of that was about 15 minutes because it takes me a long time to explain some of these concepts. It took me, when I was doing my testing earlier, it took me about 2 minutes to build the workflow from beginning to end. It's a very quick process to build these through. Once it's built, I never have to touch it again unless I need to modify it or adjust it or make adjustments because we allow that kind of change. So I can right click onto this document, go down to workflow, and then choose the process that I want, which in this case was invoice review. And we launch the document off. And we get this window. So these are the different tasks that this document is going to move through as it runs through its review and approval process. So I've built all of these. We're all good. We've going to Bob, then one of the department heads, and back to Bob, then over to Chris. So we've got our process laid out over to here. So I'm going to say OK. So now the document goes off into workflow. Notice that I'm the document owner for this. But even though I'm the owner, when I select this document, I no longer have the ability to delete this. I'm a system administrator. I should be able to delete any document, but I can't because FileHold has this document under lockdown. So one of the things we're going to be covering in our third session on this, so our next session is advanced, our third session is going to be on legal holds. This is how legal holds work. As long as a document is undergoing a workflow process, we actually stop any of the events that can happen to it, prevent deletion, stop people from checking the document out who aren't directly involved in the workflow. So this document is under FileHold protection now. No changes can get made to it. Those of you who have workflow, you may see up here there's a reviews and approval section. This is where any tasks that you have will appear. Now, I don't have any tasks right now, even though I initiated the workflow because the task hasn't come around to me. I'm the last step of the chain. So I'm not going to see anything under this here. But if I open up my workflow status report, I can see what's happening with this document as it moves through its different steps. So I can see that this is going to go to Bob, and that's the current task. I can see when it's due. And then it's going to go to Andy, Arthur, or Jennifer with an asterisk beside them. So I only need one of them to do it. And then I need Bob to do it again. Then I need Chris to do it. So I can see this track coming through. I can also see the percentage that this has been completed so far. So we've got a good look at what's happening within the system. Let's step away from this and let's go over to our Bob account. So here I'm using my Bob Smith. Let's just do a refresh because I don't want to time out over here. And if I open up my reviews and approvals, we'll see that we have a task that's due. So now I have the option of opening up and seeing what's happening with my tasks. So here's our description of the workflow: invoice review for operations with an invoice number and the document name following that. So I've got my formatting for this. There is task instructions, so I can hover over top of this and see what they are in detail if I wanted to. And then when I'm ready, I can show documents. And this will show me any of the related documents, which in this case is this one. So I could right click if I wanted to and make a local copy to take a look at this. You can see I'm using the web client to access it at this point. So this document is now ready for me to work with. So let's say I've opened this document up. I look at it and I say, yes, this is a valid document. And my task here is to please check the invoices and make sure they're valid. I believe it's valid, so I'm ready to complete my task. So we click our review over here, and then we go into complete task. Now it's going to open up a screen here that allows you to interact with this, and it gives you a summary of what's happening. So we can see, please check the invoices and make sure they're valid. And then it gives me some other details. So I can look at the workflow history, when this was initiated by Chris 2 minutes ago. I can see the task details, so the due date for it. I'm not allowed to check the document out, not required to put my password in. There's my instructions. Okay, we're good to go. I'm going to review my task. Now in this window over here, it's an opportunity to put this in, so looks fine. I can make a comment onto this. If I wanted to, I could choose an attachment. If I want to put a backup document into this, really important if you're dealing with an SOP, you might want to attach the email requesting the change that's being made into this. If it was a change order or the regulation that has an impact on this, you could include that here as an attachment, which locks it into the workflow for future reference. I've got my same details from down here, but in this case, we're good. I'm just going to say, great, I'm going to complete my task. And now you can see my workflow task screen is empty. It's ready for me to keep moving. Now, if I come back over to the desktop application and I look at the status report and I pop this open, we'll see that my first task has been completed. So Bob, Andy, Arthur, and Jennifer are now, we're done with Bob, and now the task has moved on to Andy, Arthur, and Jennifer. So everyone's going to be getting an email notification saying you have a task that's been assigned to you. Fantastic. I'm going to get that notification. I'm going to log into FileHold, and I'm going to see that the notification says this is for operations. Well, Andy's in charge of operations, so Andy logs into FileHold, goes over to the reviews and approvals section. You can see now the document has been exposed because it's now Andy's turn to look at the document. So the document is hidden, but now that Andy's involved with it, Andy gets to see the document now. So if I go over to my tasks, sorry, let me click on that. So now we've clicked on my tasks, and we can see I've got my task, and here's the instructions. Please review the attached invoice and approve it if valid. Please add PO number to the document's metadata. Okay, so I show documents, and here's my document. Look. I think it looks, I open up the native application, in this case, Adobe, and I say, yes, this looks fine, and I know what the number for this is, so I'm going to look at the metadata and file properties for this document. That's going to open up on the side panel here, and this is going to allow me to, let me just zoom a bit here. There we go. We're going to go into edit onto this, and I'm going to edit and update my metadata for this because I know that my purchase order number, remember my instructions up here, is please add PO number to the document's metadata. So we're going to add our PO number onto that, and we're going to save it. So I've now updated my document's PO. I know everything's good on this. It's an approval task, so I'm going to say, yes, this is great. Please pay these fine people at Purelator. So we're now going to complete the task. Again, think, and it gives me some different options here. So we've got, yes, this is good. No, this is bad. I've also got the reserved task here. Now, this is something I could have done right away to let Jennifer and Arthur know, hey, I've got this. Don't worry about it. I've reserved this. Nobody else is going to be working on it while I'm working on it. So we've got now our workflow history. We can see our previous statement. We launched this 5 minutes ago, so we've got an audit record as to what's happened. And now we can go ahead and we can submit our approval. I could also do a rejection. I could not approve this document. I could stop the workflow cold right here. I could say, nope, we haven't received these goods yet. Please do not pay these people. And we've got an audit log that will show that because I can put those same comments in. But here, let's assume everything's working great. So we're going to go ahead and put our comment in, goods received 2 weeks back, pay them. And we can even use this, make sure we're using English. So goods received 2 weeks back, pay them. So I've got my comment to that. Again, we could do an attachment. And now you can see in the red box here, a password is required to complete your task. So because I'm allowed to use automated software onto this, I've just gone ahead and put my password in. And now we'll complete our task with a thumbs up. My task list is complete. Andy's job is done. So now the document has moved back over to Bob. So I can head back to over here, and we should be able to take a look at the My Tasks. We'll do a refresh, and there's the assign GL code to the document. So that's now been routed back to over here. Now let's stop for a second and come back and take a look at our workflow status report. So we can see the timestamp on these, but here's what's really interesting. I'm just going to close this out here. You can see this is all saying in progress. So let's just refresh this because we want to make sure we've got accurate information. We can see that Arthur and Jennifer's task was voided. It's not that they didn't complete it, it's that they weren't required to because it was a 1 of X task. We can also see that we're 50% complete on our workflow. So even at a glance, even if I had this closed, I'd be able to say, right, we're halfway through done on this. This is the audit record. This is the actions of activity that are happening. This is my ability to monitor what's happening with a document that I've put out there into the wild. All right, so we're going to go back over to Bob's account. Our task in this case is to assign a GL code. So we need to show our documents, and then we're going to open up the metadata for this document, and then we'll go into our edit. And then from here, we're going to add in our GL code, which I've done as a dropdown. So I'm going to choose the GL code that is most appropriate for this document, and we will save it. So I've now assigned a GL code for this kind of thing an accounting person would do. Let's go ahead and complete our task. Now, what if I've been routed a whole bunch of documents at once? They'd all appear listed down here, and I could do these actions with each and every one of those documents if I wanted. But in our case, we're going to go ahead and complete this task. So we select, it's going to pop this window. Again, like before, we're going to review our task. Again, we've got all of our tasks through here. We can see check if invoice is valid as a review task. We can see it was approved from the department. So this is great. Let's go ahead and submit our final review. And I'm just going to say done because I'm not feeling eloquent at this point. And we're going to go ahead and complete our task. Great. Task list is empty. Nothing further for Bob to do. So Bob will get, again, Bob would have gotten a notification email, and now I'll be getting a notification email. And I'm not waiting for that information to come in. So we can see now we've got Bob's task onto this. Let's just do a quick refresh. So let's click off of this, click back on. Again, normally we're not doing things this quickly, so FileHold would refresh, but there we can see that the task was done by Bob. So now we've moved on to the next task, which is mine. There it is. We can see the approval onto this. We can see that it's still a hidden document. It's now been exposed because it's part of that process. So we can go ahead and we can complete the task. Now you'll notice over here, if I come back to, now that I'm back in Andy's, remember, Andy has visibility to this document now, because Andy has been part of that workflow. So we've exposed this document to Andy as being part of the workflow. All right, so back over here onto FileHold, and we've got the submit approval. We're now ready to actually to complete this document and put our CFO stamp of approval onto this document. I can see all the history onto this. I can see everything looks great. I can see that the metadata edits were being done to this. So again, I'm seeing these fine points of work that's been done to the document as it's moved through. So I say, that looks awesome. So we're going to go ahead and submit our approval, and then we can put a comment onto this, pay them, and we can go ahead and then put our password in. So I'm going to type my password and go ahead and enter, and my tasks are complete. So you can see my task list is empty. I've pinned my documents here because I like having that open every time that I open it. So that's why they still appear here. Now I can come down to my folder where the document lives, and I can see my document. It's got that H is gone. When I select my document and look at the metadata for it, I can see it's got a new version property status onto it. It is now marked as approved. And if I click on the approved, it'll show me the sign off. So I can see the sign off that happened on this document at 2:40 early today. And you'll notice that I completed a run of this. We had 2 sign-offs in that process. So we had both Andy and Chris did the sign-off. So I can see both of those sign-offs within this. Now, if I wanted to, I could also go into this and I could see the review and approval history. And this is going to open up and show me all of the stages this went through, including those details. As an admin, I can see all of these functions. And if I needed to, I could export this or print it. So again, I've got access to be able to push that information out to others, including the timestamps as to when everything happened. If there wasn't enough room on the line for me, I could always click on the comment and I could see the expanded amount to it. If there's an attachment, it would be included into here. Notice there's a column here on behalf of. I can also delegate a task. So if I know that I, as the CFO, am going to be away for a month, then I want to make sure that somebody else, I could say, Andy has approval authority for me in my absence. And I could have set my system to automatically route my workflow tasks and delegate them over to Andy. Or I could say, I'm about to hop on a plane flight. This looks important. Delegate it right now ad hoc to Andy. So I've got those as options as well. So we've got our document. It's in the system. If I go back to the folder and take a look at it, I can see it's marked as approved. And if I click onto this here, because I used my password, I've actually got an e-signature on these documents. So it's not just saying this was approved because I think it was, I can say this was approved and they signed off on it. So we've gone from 0 to a fully approved document that's visible within the system, and that is a great introduction to our workflow tasks.